NASA's recent live broadcast on November 19th regarding the foreign celestial body 3I Atlas left an impression of intentional obscurity rather than informational clarity. The prevailing feeling was that the gaps, the omissions, and the unspoken elements carried more weight than the content that was actually disclosed. Throughout an extensive presentation, the spokespersons focused on listing missions, equipment, and operational timelines, yet provided only a minimal amount of concrete and novel data about the object itself. The visual captures shown were blurry and distant, and a significant portion of the scientific information was repeatedly labeled as pending analysis or still in the process of being downloaded. Notably, there was a recurring and almost forced emphasis on the claim that 3I Atlas is nothing more than a simple comet, an insistence that felt deliberate and carefully crafted. By the end of the conference, the overall result was a profound sense of dissatisfaction, accompanied by the conviction that crucial information had been withheld. The appearance of an object originating from outside our solar system should warrant firm, transparent explanations, not a subtle evasion of fundamental aspects. At times, the reluctance surrounding a scientific discovery becomes part of the enigma and even amplifies it.
NASA's digital press briefing held on November 19th was presented as a vehicle for transparency, but its execution suggested a primarily intention to control the narrative rather than simply disclose findings. The structure of the event appeared premeditated to guide the audience toward a singular, predetermined conclusion. The briefing began with a notable prioritization of debunking speculation. Before presenting any fresh scientific evidence, the panelists repeatedly insisted on the nature of the object, categorically asserting that 3I Atlas is nothing more than a comet. This insistence suggested that the agency's main goal was not to share discoveries, but to shape public perception of the interstellar visitor. The experts followed with a series of explanations that sounded meticulously rehearsed, limiting themselves to reviewing already known information and so-called safe talking points, standard comet behavior, the dynamics of dust release, and their transient nature. The lack of analysis that transcended this basic framework is precisely what generated the greatest sense of unease. Despite the fact that 20 different space missions had been monitoring 3I Atlas across various wavelengths, the broadcast provided only a limited selection of low-resolution images, nearly all lacking detail and captured from great distances. Although high-caliber instruments such as Hubble, the James Webb, Lucy, Psyche, MAVEN, and MRO were mentioned, each reference to these sophisticated tools was invariably accompanied by multiple caveats and disclaimers.
An extensive series of justifications was presented for the omission of key visual material, including technical limitations, instruments pushed to their limits, adverse observational conditions, non-ideal angles, pending processes, calibration still required, and lack of public availability, data not ready for release. This succession of technical arguments served as a barrier to access the most anticipated information. Despite these reported limitations, the speaker's behavior was marked by notable and persistent calmness, avoiding at all times any hint of surprise or irregularity. This composure remained even when referring to potentially extraordinary aspects of the comet. For example, when describing the object's atypical chemical composition or suggesting an origin predating the formation of our solar system, the speakers avoided delving into these subjects. This quick diversion away from crucial points gave the impression that there was a calculated risk in exploring questions they did not wish to address openly. Taken as a whole,
The broadcast did not function as a typical scientific update, but rather as an exercise in subtle pacification, designed to conclude the discussion before it could truly begin. The final and forceful message was that 3I Atlas possesses no particularities, that the situation is completely under control, and that the pending information will be made public in the future. However, no clear timeline was provided for the release of data, nor was any unprocessed image shown.
The direct outcome of the session was the delivery of a report redundant in speech but devoid of substantial content, an episode meticulously orchestrated that left viewers with the conviction that the true conclusions, whatever their nature, had been intentionally withheld. The most notable element of the entire broadcast was not the knowledge NASA shared, but precisely the information that was carefully avoided. The public was repeatedly reminded that a significant portion of the data on 3I Atlas was still pending download, processing, or calibration. This phrase became a recurring and defensive theme, functioning as a subtle curtain between the audience and the vast amount of raw information gathered by the 20 operational missions spread throughout the solar system. For an event whose stated purpose was to keep the planet informed about the presence of an interstellar object, the amount of tangible information offered was surprisingly limited. The agency listed an extensive inventory of instruments involved in observing 3I Atlas: Hubble capturing its faint atmosphere, Webb identifying molecular signatures, MAVEN tracking hydrogen emission, and the Lucy and Psyche probes obtaining views from remote positions.
Despite the magnitude of the scientific resources deployed, the broadcast practically omitted the presentation of these high-quality images. Viewers were given access only to a handful of partial shots, a diffuse smudge here, a faint streak there, material that in no way matched the vast trove of information NASA claimed to have collected. The agency discussed in detail the principles behind the sophisticated spectrographs and the volumes of high-resolution imagery, yet the visual materials supporting this data remained systematically concealed. The experience was comparable to receiving a weather forecast that provides only verbal descriptions of what the satellite captured without showing the satellite images themselves. What proved even more perplexing was the fleeting manner in which anomalous data was introduced, mentioned with suspicious haste. Among these were the unusually high proportion of carbon dioxide, an excess of nickel relative to iron, the unexpected polarization of the dust, and the hypothesis of an origin system older than the Sun itself. Each of these indicators suggests a unique and singular history for 3I Atlas, one deserving of careful and detailed analysis. Yet these revelations were addressed only superficially before the discussion abruptly returned to topics considered less volatile. The next phase of the presentation focused on justifying the technical limitations, giving the impression that the audience was being prepared for the existence of imperfections in the information that was being withheld. The spokespersons explained that, in order to obtain a view of the object, the instruments were forced to operate beyond their standard capabilities. They noted that some spacecraft had to adopt suboptimal or awkward orientations, which inevitably introduced visual artifacts and reflections in the images. They also admitted that the data could be misinterpreted without proper calibration, suggesting that a premature release might lead to confusion. Although these explanations are individually reasonable, together they outlined an unusual pattern. The space agency consistently prioritized explaining why the information could not be disclosed at that moment, rather than emphasizing the importance of sharing it. It was not about denying the existence of the data, it was exactly the opposite. It was made clear that a massive amount of information had been collected across various wavelengths, distances, and through a wide range of instruments. However, the broadcast offered only minimal fragments, carefully filtered and stripped of anything controversial. The public was repeatedly urged to be patient, to wait for the complete analysis, and to place their trust in the established process. While patience is considered a desirable quality, the selective manner in which the information was presented created a palpable tension. NASA assured that there was no ongoing abnormality, but its reluctance to show the full picture made the absence of data even more significant, suggesting that the silence was protecting something not meant for the public eye, at least for the moment. As the final moments of the broadcast approached, the most striking aspect was not a conclusion, a scientific finding, or a new image, but the consistent pattern of withholding that defined each of the responses. Whenever questions arose about atypical behaviors, unexpected signals, or the true significance of a visitor from outside our solar system, the explanations became more ambiguous. The pace of disclosure slowed, and the content dissolved under multiple layers of caution. The agency emphasized that 3I Atlas adheres to the typical behavior of a comet, even though the very anomalies they overlooked hinted at a much older and more complex origin story than they were willing to discuss openly. They referenced its possible arrival from a stellar system that predates the Sun, yet without delving into the profound implications of such a claim. They mentioned unusual chemical ratios and dust characteristics rarely observed in comets within our neighborhood, only to quickly retreat back to familiar and safe comparisons. They admitted the existence of subtle, non-gravitational forces acting upon the object, but labeled them as routine phenomenon, even though such forces are rarely identical between comets. Each detail that deviated from the norm surfaced momentarily, like a faint signal amid the noise, and then immediately folded back into the reassuring narrative that nothing surprising was at play. What amplified the silence was the sharp contrast between the questions posed and the answers offered. Inquiries about the comet's morphology, its composition, its point of origin, and the gaps in the data were met with expressions such as "too early to make a judgment," "the data is uncertain," or "still under analysis." Although it is inherent to the scientific method that research takes time, the perceived hesitation did not feel like the natural cadence of science, but rather a meticulous strategy to manage and contain the audience's expectations.